and welcome to It's a Family Affair, Perspectives from Two Generations on 60 Years of Black Legacy and History at Brown, and I must say, Black excellence. Before we begin, I'm actually going to take a point of privilege. And I would like you all to join me in celebrating Bernicestine Elizabeth McLeod Bailey's Honorary Degree Award, Doctor of Humane Letters, IT Leader, Pembroke Center Champion. We are because you were. Please stand. Thank you all. When I arrived at Brown University in the summer of 2021, one of the earliest opportunities I was given was coordinating with Aisha Coates, Dr. Aisha Coates, outreach and engagement with Black alumni. And as we traveled meeting the nation, meeting Black alumni groups, I learned about the many ways that many, not all, have remained connected to Brown. And for those that did remain connected to Brown, how meaningful those enduring connections have been throughout their life experiences, but how much they value and would love to be even more connected to their alma mater. Building a bridge back to Brown evolved out of those conversations. This website collects in one accessible place the oral histories of the Pembroke Center for Teaching and Research on Women and the Blacks at Brown timeline, sponsored by the Inman Page Council, providing a foundation to chronicle and preserve the existing stories of those of our current and future students, faculty, and staff, upon which a bridge back to Brown can be traveled by all. Collecting and sharing these stories, ephemeral and artifacts, will offer Black alumni, their family and friends, and all visitors, quite frankly, to the site, an opportunity to learn more about the university, its culture, during different periods of time. It will also give contributors to the Oral History Project and the timeline really the opportunity to revisit their time at Brown University and to share their unique experiences and to fellowship with others and enjoy the telling and retelling of their stories. And now it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Christopher West. Dr. West is Brown's inaugural Curator of the Black Diaspora, and we are absolutely fortunate to have Dr. West here at Brown University. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
You have to start with the basics. Service. Whenever you see somebody from the Bailey family, it's connected to service of the institution. That's the legacy. From fall of 1964, the Bailey family has engaged in Brown University. It is about legacy. It is about telling the story. And in many ways, what's incredibly fascinating is that these four individuals embody what this institution is about and the choices that they make about why come to Brown University. For Bernicestine, it's going to be as a systems manager, but her undergraduate degree is in econ. Her choice is going to be at Pembroke, because at that point, Pembroke is separated. But her engagement in many ways is to tell a story. She never in many ways leaves the institution. With her husband and her children, she consistently comes back. She charges Pembroke to say that we need to tell stories about women in history. She's the inaugural chair of that archive committee. And that story of legacy is just one part of it, and that's going to be Bernicestine. She will meet the love of her life, Harold. And if you've ever spent time with him, you know that's the love of her life. Now consider what that means in one family. That a corporation that started before the American Revolution in 1764. That they both have sat on the corporate board. That they both have been board of trustee members. And that in one family that you're going to get 2 of the awards most distinguished by the Brown Alumni Association. The Brown Bear. That's one family. That's 60 years. They will have a daughter, and that daughter will see the same legacy that African-American women before World War II are going to do. They will come to this institution. They will find something in its DNA, in its matter, in the way that the institution says something about who you're supposed to be, and then they will commit service. And she will do what other black women have done. Take their undergraduate degree in Brown, transition to medical school, and be of service to her community. And Harold III is that tradition of Fritz Pollard, the intercollegiate athlete who arrives at the institution, recognizing that in that place of engagement, this is his reunion, coming back. They will go on to the NITs, but at the core, Harold Bailey III is about service to the institution, even to this moment. When you think about Fritz Pollard, you can think about his work in the NFL, but in many ways, that doesn't tell you anything. Think about Pollard in the 1950s working within the black community, because there's something unique in the DNA about Brown, that when you come here, you spend the rest of your life of service. That's what this is about. Anytime you see the Bailey family, it's service. Service to community, service to the institution, and ultimately service to family. We're going to start with Bernicestine, and each of them I'm going to ask a very simple question, why Brown? And I think that what you'll see and hear is that that why Brown question is going to be different for each, and yet it's going to speak dramatically about what this means in terms of a family affair. I'll start with Bernicestine.
Thank you, Chris. I also wanted to thank Dr. Sylvia Carey-Butler, and Dr. West for pulling this together. I know you're fairly new to Brown, but we are encouraged by the work you have done and are looking forward to the work you will continue to do in the future. So thank you so much. I want to thank all of you out there for attending. We're going to try to do a 60-year drive-by in 40 minutes. So it's going to be fast and it's going to be top level. But each of us has the story. All of you, each of you has a Brown story as well. And so as you listen to Dr. Carey-Butler talk, we're trying to collect those stories in some way and weave them together to form a picture of Brown. And that's the really important part of history, learning other people's stories. So how I got to Brown. We were obviously not the first black people to arrive on campus. There were others before us, but I will say, and some of my classmates are here from the class of '68, that our class kind of set the pattern, or we were at the front wave of the progression of Brown changing as an institution and admitting more students of color. Now, to set the scene a little bit, just to give you a little bit of background, we were here in the 60s. We applied to Brown at the end of '63. Well, actually, it was Pembroke. I shouldn't even say Brown. I'm so used to saying Brown now. Because Brown and Pembroke merged in, I think, '71, '72. Mm-hmm. But so my class of women applied to Pembroke. And that would have been 1963. And you think about historically what was happening then. In August of 1963, we had the March on Washington. In November of 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated. And then, when we arrived on campus in '64, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Brown was celebrating its 200th anniversary, the 1764, 1964. And so our freshman year, President Johnson actually came to me in the auditorium to launch the celebration of Brown's 200th year. And if we fast forward a little bit to 1968, when we were graduating, that was when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated in April during our spring break. And in 1968, like the week that we graduated, or right after, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. So when you look at that as a backdrop, you say, oh my goodness. We were on campus at that point, and the question is, how in the world could you make decisions or anything during all of that? But I think looking back on it, when you're living through it, you don't realize that all of this is happening. You just kind of go about your day to day, and you record and react to things as they happen, but you know, they weren't prohibitive. I am the oldest of 4 children. My father had a degree from Morris College in Sumter, South Carolina. So I was kind of second generation college attendee. But my parents, I'm looking back at it now, and I said, well, they had no misgivings about sending me to this all-white institution that I'd never, ever seen. From DC, I grew up in DC, Chocolate City, right? DC public schools. And here, all of a sudden I say, well, you know, I want to go to Pembroke in Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And it was, you know, people were asking me, where in the world is Rhode Island? I said, I don't know. I've never been there, but it's on the map. So I was intrigued initially because in my Latin class at my high school, our teacher would always have students from various colleges coming in to talk to us about different places. And I was intrigued by this place that wasn't co-ed, and it wasn't a women's college. It was a coordinate relationship, as they expressed it, in an Ivy League institution. So I said, well, that sounds different enough. I think I'd like to pursue that. And so I applied here, and Howard and Carnegie Mellon, because I was very much into science and math. And so I was accepted at all of them. But I decided to come here. And looking back, I think aspirationally, my parents went along with the program because as Dr. West said the other day, it's kind of version 2.0. They had moved from South Carolina to DC, and the migration, I guess, during the 40s of black folks from the South to the North, relatively, since DC is still South. But aspirationally, I think they're looking at that as a way for my generation, their children, to move on and onward and upward. So at the time, Pembroke and Brown, as I said, were separate institutions. We applied separately to Pembroke. We had our own deanery, our own gym, our own library. We did not eat with the men or anything. But we did have classes at Brown. All of our classes were there. Our degree was from Brown. So in that sense, the coordinate education was carried out that way. When I arrived on campus, there were 6 black women in my class and 5 black men. I think there was one Pembroker who was a senior and one who was a sophomore, I think, ahead of us. And when I came here, I was pleasantly surprised because I didn't know what to expect. I thought it would be all white, and I was comfortable with that. But I always kind of joke because I say that they put each of us in a different dorm. Sandy's there, Sandy can attest to it. So we had, I said spreading the wealth. So we had to go from dorm to dorm in order to be able to talk to each other. But since, you know, academic life is so busy, I think very few of us even got to do that. But we'd take breaks now and then and try to catch up. And we laugh a lot because 4 of the women who came in were tall, black women, 4 of the 6. And most of the men were short. So, what do you do with that? So social life was interesting. Anyway, so that gives you a kind of a picture of what was going on. The classes after me, there were a few more that came in for more people of, you know, African American primarily at that time. You know, we didn't get into literally BIPOC or other people of color. But we had a core group, enough of a core to form the Afro Society. And
Right.
I think we started meeting in 1967. Of course, everybody was asking, what in the world are you doing? And why do you feel you have to do that? but we, you know, we needed something to come together. So despite the questioning, we did meet. I'm just thinking about part of my college career. We were able to see Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on campus. I actually shook his hand. And obviously, I said he was assassinated in April of 1968. So it was in the 66, 67 time frame. We were expecting Malcolm X. He had been invited here to speak, but he was assassinated before that time. So we didn't get to see him then, even though I understand he had come earlier to Brown in 1962 for a session. Anyway, that's kind of the campus highlights that I remember from a black point of view, being able to see speakers that were very active at that particular time. On campus itself, the main issues were Vietnam, of course, civil rights, and I think a lot of, as I said, the class of 1964 seemed to be the beginning of the wave, and a lot of that was driven by activism on campus, by students who were here pushing Brown, or Pembroke, I'll say, Pembroke at least, to admit more students of color. And so that's why I think we had 6, which is almost a bumper crop, in the class of 1968. So I guess if I look at it just from a thematic point of view, there were very few people of color on campus. There were very few members of faculty on campus. It was a very activist campus. I would say that the only other people that we saw who were of color were, well, I'll put it this way. Pembroke had a maid service. And so that was our opportunity to see other people of color in our daily living environment. So, you know, I look out now and I go across Brown's campus, and the difference is just so amazing, and it's so thrilling. But another characteristic of that time, it was very tumultuous, as I indicated. But at that point, Brown was a very activist campus. I don't think it slowed down much. I just remember various instances throughout the years where Brown has been very, very activist. So it was exciting, and started, well, launched everything for what was to come after. I will add a footnote that I did not participate in the walkout of 1968 because I had graduated. But I will turn it over now to someone who was here and actually walked out.
That is the rumor. So, I'd like to keep this at a high level. Let's take a look at where the country was in terms of race, and not just race, black people being at any place of importance in this country. The country's attitude was that we shouldn't be there. That if we were there as a group or we were there as individuals, we were in general pulling down the quality of whatever was being done or whatever could be done. And that was kind of a mindset. So, I'm still here?
You are.
Okay. So in many ways, okay, I'm back. I could hear it. So in many ways, what was going on was that having black people at Brown as students, faculty, administrators would be an accommodation. It's an experiment. And that, in terms of the number of people in a class that were here, I came in from Tennessee. I had, as a sophomore, integrated high school, been part of that integration. I got an opportunity. Okay, we'll be.
Yes.
That's.
There.
Okay, let's try that. Evidently, I got too much in my pocket. So, okay. When I say it was an accommodation, I think it's pretty obvious what I'm talking about there from a racial point of view. And the attitude was always, did we belong here? Not only did we belong here, but if we were here, is there any way we could keep up with the white people who were here and their capabilities? And I say that just to make it very stark, because this is the Sesame Street version of what took place. And I'd love to get into more detail with it at some other time. But you take that as an attitude, and what is so incredible is the arc that takes us from that kind of an attitude to our having the first and only African-American president of an Ivy League institution some 40 years later, not even 40, 35 years later. How in the heck did that happen? What took place? To me, why Brown originally was, I wanted to be here because, as Bernicestine said, I wanted to see more people of color, more black people have an opportunity to be at a place like this. I wanted to first prove, number one, I deserved to be here. And there was nobody any smarter than I was in the world as far as I was concerned. So I was here for that reason. And number two, I had people who were, I knew people who were just as smart as I was, who were back home, who would never have an opportunity to get here. So the whole idea that we shouldn't be here or it needs to be quiet, that was absolutely repugnant to me, and it got my back up. So when the situation came up after having integrated a high school as a sophomore in high school, for us to go further here, Pembroke refused to make any kind of commitment to increase the numbers of women. In my class, there were 8 black men and 2 black women. That's one fewer than in Bernisteine's class, which was 2 years earlier. And I did have to play up to get Bernicestine. But anyway, I'm still playing up. But with that kind of, so you see there was that kind of a lack of any kind of consistency. That's what was going on. So when the women of Pembroke came over and said that wasn't going to happen, they wanted to have a demonstration. We did the walkout in 1968. I am not going to spend a lot of time on that because you've probably heard about that in other places. The net of that, however, was, just so you know, was it a foregone conclusion this would turn out okay? No. We have a cousin who tried the same thing down in South Carolina with another group. He was thrown out of school. Everybody involved was thrown out of school. We understood. We could have been told, pack your bags and get out of here for having walked out. But just about all of the black people on campus did. The result was major commitments by the university to have numbers of students that would attend, numbers of faculty that would show up, and administrators that would show up. And the commitment primarily was that within X amount of time, Brown was going to have the same percentage in its demographic of black people and people of color as in the US population. Now, that was a commitment that was made, and I got to tell you, it was immediately the next year visible. All of a sudden, we had 90 black kids matriculating, where a couple of years before that, we had 11 or 10, and all of a sudden, there were faculty members. And for the first time in my life, I saw a black faculty member at Brown, Professor Charles Nichols. And that was tough. It was incredible to see that. And then it just went on from there. We had an Afro department, Afro Studies department program at the time, not a full department. So things were starting to happen instantly there, but because of the commitment that was made by the university. What was exciting about Brown was that, as happened in the '68 walkout, we had an administration that was willing to listen, and an administration that was willing to go against that national attitude about black people and where they belong and whether they should have a seat at the table. And I'm going to call out people like Professor Hazeltine, who was critical for that kind of thing. But we also had a rash of incredible professors that came to Brown who were of color. And Lena Frazzetti is here. Lena's here.
Yeah.
Lena. We had, the reason I mentioned Lena is because, we're not there yet. That's okay. At one point, what came out of 1968 was this feeling of family and the feeling of camaraderie around everything that took place in the black community. We literally were building kind of a virtual black family, that what came out of that with a certain energy. When I left Brown with Bernicestine, we didn't really want to see this place again because what we went through was traumatic. It was ugly. When we came back after the walkout, white parents were asking their children, is the university really going to do this? It's going to go downhill. You're going to destroy the academic capability of the university. And we all individually had to take on those kind of concerns. So we literally left and didn't want to see it again. What changed that for me was Professor Hazeltine came to Boston, where we were living, and gave a lecture. And at that lecture, there were all these black people we didn't know were even in the area. And it was like old home week when we gathered after the lecture to talk about having been at Brown, having now been outside, and wanting to stay connected. We held as a result of that, we worked with Alumni Relations to hold a session at our house. And Lena Frazzetti was going to be she was our faculty speaker. We expected about 25, 30 people. We ended up with 100 who showed up at the house. And it became clear we needed to organize. We needed to get involved here. We needed to have some connection back to the university. Fortunately, Alumni Relations was there, saw it, carried that back. And frankly, Howard Swearer, as president, started working with us to get more and more connected. That led to the Minority Affairs Committee work that we did with the Brown Alumni Association, whose leadership was not real happy about us getting started. But the vice president of the University Relations and the president and Howard Swearer wanted us to continue to work with them to try to change things. So we strategized about what would be important to get a seat at the table and to get respect at the table. And that was a focus on leadership at the university. Net, we had in the corporation level, the Corporation Committee on Minority Affairs, but we had nothing going on at the alumni leadership level. So we worked with as a Minority Affairs Committee, the first thing we had to do was build credibility. So we did things like a newsletter, and we put together a directory of all the black alumni who ever existed, and a number of other things that ended up eventually winning awards for alumni relations. That got us credibility. We got ex officio positions on the leadership structure of the Alumni Association because of that. And we built from that, and there were a ton of people, many of whom are here, who continued to work inside of that structure to show that there is all this talent and all this leadership that was being ignored or didn't exist or couldn't even get in before. And we built from that a base of people to the point that we had a third world alumni network with branches in about 8 cities across the country by the 1990s. Javette was one of the people who helped lead that. And so after we built that, we got into the 1990s, the university ran into a money problem, and there was no internet. So the only way you could be updated on what was going on was to come and gather here on a periodic basis every year or twice a year. The university wanted to cut the costs of bringing people back to do that. And they ended up saying, well, we're going to have one Black, one Latinx, and one Asian American person who will represent these segments. And that's it. And we're not going to bring anybody else back. So all of that work with the network and all these people just kind of disappeared kind of in the mid-1990s. And as far as the new people coming in, as students went, they had no idea anything had ever happened before. We ended up, after that, with 2 students who did an independent study paper under Elmo Morgan as a professor. And they were looking at black alumni associations in the Ivy League. And there was none at Brown. And their take was, there'd never been one. So Artis Arnold and I'm sorry, I'm losing it.
Russell.
How could I forget Russell? Yeah, Russell Malborough. Who we all are great to. Is Russell here? Darn it, back up. I just finished it. So they put the paper together. Elmo knew of all the work that had gone on before and put us all together. And Joel is here too. We ended up with a task force with Joel and Elmo and Russell and Artis and Elmo. And we put together what would look like a black alumni association. Now, one thing was the university for years had said, we will not allow a black or an Asian American or a Latinx alumni association inside of the Brown Alumni Association banner. Will not allow it. That changed, believe it or not, when Gordon Gee came on board. And literally, the one great thing he did was to say, he said, that's ludicrous. We're going to do it. We want to get as many people back here as possible, make that happen. And that opened the door for us to have, to really do the work on Inman Page. Elmo called together a big congregation of folks in Newport. There were probably a couple of hundred people in Newport who were of color and put together, here's what it's going to look like. Let's talk about how we'd structure it. We really went through a planning session. And the net is in 2001, we had, at the inauguration, we had our first black president of Brown or an Ivy League institution. At the same time that we had the inauguration of the Inman Page Council, okay? And we had, as Javette, our first president of the Brown Alumni Association, who was African American. All 3 of those things happened in one day. And we all met at the faculty club, and that was one incredible, so that's where the seat at the table happened. And from there, it was really all those people who'd worked for decades in all these different levels doing things at Brown clubs and with NASP and with recruiting and in different areas where people could see the value that people of color brought to the table for them so that there was respect. And at the same time, while that respect was being built, there was a bond built with this institution for all of those folks in the community. So when we have a black alumni reunion, I mean, it's like having a revival for Brown. People are just juiced about coming back here. And the ones who haven't been back for like 20 years come back and think, oh my God, I had no idea what was going on. So anyway, that's kind of a net. There's a lot of other stuff I looked at. But that takes us to 2001. I'm real late.
So I guess it's my turn. That's fine.
Yeah, you're.
So why Brown? I grew up at Brown. So my earliest memories were running around the green with my brother in tow. Also having accessibility to leadership. Again, I was young, I was African American. I was growing up in a predominantly white community. And so I wouldn't always get positive reinforcement for my achievements, but I always felt like Brown supported me and was part of our family from the time that I was younger. So in that, I was also able to look at students and how they would transition and grow and then turn into these professionals and leaders. To that same aim, I would sit with my family and we would talk to Dr. Swearer. We would see Vartan, and he would hug us, and he really saw me, I felt like, and connected with me and made me feel welcome, as did everybody who I came in contact with from Brown. But one of my most formative moments and earlier moments was in '85. So I'll kind of talk about being, I guess, at the walkout of '85, not knowing that I was. Because I will preface this by saying our parents really were unique in the sense that they would take us everywhere, to every meeting, any reception. My brother and I would always be in tow. And I even remember they worked on the Michael Dukakis campaign, and I remember being in third grade, getting a dress and running to the Massachusetts Capitol and having a reception there and trying to breathe for the first time. So they would always expose us to these new experiences, but in that we were always surrounded by adults, and we did really well for kids, at 9 and 5. So. But I go back to this being 8, and my brother was 4. So we came that day. I had a young lady who was a Brown student, and she was babysitting us for the day, I say. So she took us to McDonald's. She talked to us out on the green. She took us to her dorm room. And I was just in awe because I could see, how she fit into her community. We went to the Third World Center, and what I really loved was that everyone was a family. So what my father spoke about and my mother spoke about, there was a sense of community and purpose, vitality. Everything was so dynamic, and I wanted to be a part of that. So this young woman took us. She kind of, I guess, kept us occupied. But then when we came back to negotiations, I was able to see all of these students who looked like me. And that was so important. And what was really important was that the woman that I had seen as my babysitter kind of melded in to her community to have one voice. Now, in that, there are all these students surrounding my parents who are just kind of standing there and talking, which I thought was strange. I didn't know what was going on. I knew that it was very important that there were tense times because sometimes it would go quiet. There were times where they would laugh, everyone would laugh. So I wasn't really sure what was going on, but it just kept happening. And then they'd break, and then we'd go out, run to McDonald's or what have you. We didn't eat at McDonald's often, so this was a treat because we were vegetarian, so I will preface that, okay? So it was really important. And it was so important, and even being 8 at the time, my brother was 4, I just remember being captivated. We would sit and we would watch and we would listen. But again, my parents were standing up and talking to students, and there was a large group of people, and yet they were very comfortable and they were very forthright and what have you. So at the end of all this, I asked my father, I think, like, what was going on. And I just remember he said, you know, these students want to be treated like everyone else. And they, you know, and that's their right. And that really impressed something upon me, because even though I know they did a great job of trying to instill Black pride in me and confidence, I would love to say it didn't happen, but I just had that worn down in me, just kind of going through my own educational journey. But that was really one of my earliest experiences. What I also want to say about that, though, is that there was power in seeing my babysitter, because I don't want to just demean her in that role. She was a babysitter, she was a community leader, she was a student, and that helped me with my own aspirations, because I knew that as a woman, I could be dynamic in whatever I did. On top of that, I was able to see these presidents. Like I said, you know, we would sit with Mr. Swearer, and my parents would be talking to him. We slept at the president's mansion once, but we would sit and talk with Mr. Gregorian. I didn't really interact with Guy much, even though I was here when he was there. That's another story. But I'm also going to talk about Ruth, because Ruth came later after I graduated. And she was magical. So you just sit, and from the minute she'd enter the room, she knew who everybody was, what everyone was supposed to be doing, and she would just work the room to get everyone doing what she needed you to do right then. And there was no question. She was just like butter. She should have been president of the United States. Mm-hmm. So that taught me, again, another Black woman, other than my mother, who was a huge role model, but to strive, and that I could achieve, and that I could be. And that was very important for me. So I will say, when it came time for me to consider Brown, I was a little bit more hesitant, and it was because I knew that my parents had paved this way. I know as a parent now how important legacy is to me, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that Brown really fit me. So I knew that I grew up in a family, I knew that I had big shoes to fill, but I wasn't really sure if Brown was right for me. And that was important because I knew that wherever I went, I wanted to feel like I belonged, because I hadn't really felt like I belonged in my educational journey all the time. So I never told them that I applied to Brown. I purposely didn't do that. So I would talk about the other schools that I was applying to, and I remember my parents would be like, oh, okay, and have you thought about Brown? Yeah, but BU's nice, and I'm gonna look at Wellesley maybe, or NYU. So I made it a point because I did apply to Brown, but I wanted to make sure that it would really fit me. So I guess my experience came from being at Exeter, and I went to Phillips Exeter Academy. And when I was there, we have the Harkness method, and everyone would sit around and they would talk about whatever point of view you had. So if you read a book that day, you had to talk about what your point of view was, and another person had a different point of view, and no one was wrong. So you're exchanging ideas constantly. And I realized that had helped me grow so much that I wanted a place that would help me really do that and thrive and grow, since that to me helped me grow leaps and bounds. And I found that Brown really did that for me. I came to the Black experience at Brown, so I was able to kind of see it, talk to the students. I was in awe, but that pretty much sealed the deal for me because I felt seen and heard, and I knew that I could contribute. I will say that when I got to Brown, class of 98 to me was like, class of 90. It was class of 98. Class 99. Of 98 class of 98 for me, thank you, was on fire in terms of community. I mean, I got here, I felt like it was back in 85. Just a sense of vitality, community, purpose. I was just like, this is great, this is wonderful. There were so many Black organizations, So I joined. Now, I felt a little insecure because, unfortunately, 2 weeks before TWTP, I had an appendicitis. So I had an appendectomy. So I had to miss TWTP. And I know that when I came back, you know, everyone's looking at me like, oh, she's one of those. Like, she didn't want to join. You know, she didn't want to be in these groups. But I just really didn't know what to do. I just had to hit the ground running. So that being said, I joined these organizations. I was passionate. But I would say in the next year to 2 years, I noticed that it kind of like ran out of steam. And what I was kind of hearing back from students is that we were the ones who've done this. Like, we're the only ones who've done this, and we're creating this from nothing. And that really shocked me because I know what my parents did. I, you know, experienced and lived it, and it almost felt like it was like a game of telephone and the line was dropped. So I am so glad that Russell and Ardith like wrote what they did and kind of were archaeologists, if you will, and just kind of went back into history and resurrected this important history. So that being said, in terms of my identity, I would say Brown really had an effect on me, a strong effect. And specifically with regard to my racial identity. I had, of course, seen myself as African American, but I really didn't know what that meant, what it meant to be African American and Black, until I decided to go to Zimbabwe my junior year. So I would say that that was a real quintessential experience for me. I just remember the beauty of Zimbabwe. And I remember this great weight being lifted off of me when I touched down there. And that's where I really started to realize how much the US racial construct can weigh on your soul. There was such a physical drag that was lifted. So I became more buoyant, creative, inspired. It was so important to me. And so I wrote letters and wrote essays and drew comics and did what have you. Now, do you want me to read my excerpt? I know, you don't have time, but you, okay, we'll move it. So in one of those letters, let me just see. I wrote from Zimbabwe, and I'll just read an excerpt of it. I wrote, "The land was a creamy brown expanse with true green trees. I say true green because I now understand why green is green in the Crayola crayon boxes. It is a true color. The lush grass, the swaying trees, the rich, supple flowers bending from their fruitful, overbearing weight. I wanted to cry. It is one thing to be swayed by an object's beauty and to see this beauty as the object's worth. It is quite another thing to see the earth for the first time. Africa is a womb. Aisha means life in Swahili, and I was always proud that I had an African name. I not only see where I came from here, I also see where life originated from. From the amoeba to the starry expanse of sky, Africa is Aisha. This is a truly beautiful thought, and if considered by the observer, would bring them to their knees in prayer, crying. This is religion. That is why I say to deny Africa is to deny oneself life. This is why I feel proud and happy walking down the streets of Harare. I know the truth." So I wrote that in February of 1998. There were a lot of things going on, but one of the things that I really delved in was the beauty of anonymity. I could walk down the street, and where some people are like, well, you know, I was the only person sticking out, I was so used to being the only one and being at my schools, you know, and someone would come in and talk to people like, well, do you have any diversity? And they'd be like, oh, we have an Aisha. And Aisha is wonderful and she likes this, and they'd tell them all about, you know, who I was. And so I was used to that. So just being anonymous gave me power for once. And it was very interesting because a lot of Zimbabweans would look at me and they'd kind of ignore me until my, you know, white classmates would come by, and then they realized something was different. But for the most part, they would ask me if I was from Malawi or Zambia or South Africa, so they knew that I wasn't really like them. So, but at the same time, it allowed me to kind of examine more of my identity and who I was. So after returning from Zimbabwe, I went to Venezuela with Dr. Fruzzetti on a trek. And in Zimbabwe, I had studied the oral tradition of the Shona since I was an English major, so that was very important to me. And I do want to say this, excuse me. I knew that I always wanted to be a physician, even though I'd always loved creative writing. And one of my experiences in Zimbabwe was that a friend of mine sprained her ankle, and we were in a remote village, and we had to sit and wait for a physician. There were about hundreds of people waiting also for the physician in different stage of life. There were people clearly dying, people really wounded, but regardless, they had traveled for miles to see this one physician who really didn't have a lot of materials. But one thing I remember is that when he would come out of his room, they would look up at him with such inspiration and hope. And that really solidified my dream of becoming a physician. I had always wanted to do it, but after that it was, okay, I'm an English major, how am I going to work to do that for people? Because that's what I wanted to do. So I will fast forward. So I went to Venezuela with Dr. Fruzzetti to study the oral tradition of the Yakwana Indians, since they were able to pass on medical information, religion, traditions to their children through stories. And I felt like that was so important to learn and know about. We essentially were in a small village called Culebra, which is Spanish for snake, and it was 2 hours south of Caracas, and you had to get there only by a single engine plane flying over the Amazon. So that was interesting. So we ended up being marooned on like a small, I would say, kind of peninsula or inlet or something, about a mile upwards from the main village. And again, I had always identified myself as African American, and when, you know, the people of the tribe would ask me what I was, because they would look at me, because in the sun my skin would kind of glow this deep, vibrant red, I would just say negra or black. And I just remember this one woman put her hand right next to mine, and she kind of looked at me. We were the same complexion, and so she kind of patted my hand and said mezcla, which means mixed. So again, it was really where I had to start incorporating my Native American or indigenous history as well. In terms of being a female, I just remember walking out around the village themselves, and other men were kind of calling me negra, 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 and they were catcalling me. You know, and I talked to Dr. Fruzzetti about it. It just made me really uncomfortable. And I remember talking to one of the leaders of this program through Cornell, and he was native Venezuelan. He could trace his parents back to Spain, and he just kind of brushed me off and said, well, Black women are used for sex here, you know, excuse me guys, but that's essentially what they are. That's what your identity is, you know, get used to it. And so again, it really challenged my own identity, because being at Brown, again, having that legacy of leadership, the accessibility, going through my own identity, finding my own voice, I realized that I ended up kind of fighting against that notion. That wasn't going to be who I was, and I was going to leave my mark on the world. But there were some other, situations that I was put in, some that were life-threatening. I won't get into those, but I will just say that Brown really helped me thrive and try to lead my life in service. So that even now, when I am a pediatrician in the heart of Florida in this time, which is very trying, Brown has taught me those skills of being able to come into a community that can be foreign and trying to still instill light and hope and values to my patients and hopefully the larger community.
Thank you.
So I guess I am the last one, and I'll try and be as brief but honest as I possibly can. In growing up, we had three families. We had our nuclear family, our extended family, cousins, uncles, and then we had our family here at Brown University. And mom and dad, icons. We'd come up every other weekend, as Aisha alluded to, and it was a community. Everybody, when we were here, was extremely gracious to us, from presidents to leaders, trustees in the university. We couldn't go 10 feet, I felt like, without somebody saying, "Hey, Mom," or "Bernicestine, Harold." And it wasn't this Harold, it was that Harold, and it was this Bernicestine. But I have to say, this was really our community from the very beginning. At that time, I remember downtown Providence was a little shady, right? And so we stayed up on the hill, and whether it was commencements that we would attend. I do remember this one incident where Buddy Cianci was riding on his horse, and he knew Mom and Dad, and I got to shake his hand. But we met dignitaries from Stevie Wonder to Hepburn. It was just, and at the time, me being 5 years younger than my sister, or four.
Thank
four. Not to age my sister, four. She really was instrumental in taking care of me, but we were here making me feel welcome. But as she alluded to, we were at everything, whether it was a BAA event or Board of Trustees meeting. We would be on the outside,
Right.
Of course.
We would.
But it really was a third community, and in terms of my experience and kind of how I saw the world, Mom and Dad always made it clear to us that we belonged wherever we were, and as they've done for so many people here at the university, what they fought for, making sure African Americans, we deserve to be on every stage, and we can do it better. And so, growing up, I always had that mentality. We grew up in affluent, whiter areas, if you will, and Mom and Dad would always fight when there was with the administration's principals. I remember there was one time at school when I got put in the principal's office for someone calling me a name, a racial slur. And I will tell you, my mother walked in, and the principal, he comes out and his face is bright red. And she takes me and says, "Let's go, son, let's go home." And anytime anything like that happened ever again, it didn't happen very often, but I'll say my mother's a woman of just tenacious, beautiful. She is somebody that refuses to lose. She's my rock. She's the rock of our family, and I think we would all agree on that. And nothing, well, I won't say nothing, but I'll say that Dad couldn't have done anything that he accomplished without my mother's strength. And I really want to highlight that. So just an amazing example, and it's a pleasure to call them parents. So let's say that. Why I decided, so I went to Choate. I know my sister went to Phillips Exeter. I played basketball and at Choate and all through the sort of AAU circuit very competitively. And I applied to Exeter and Choate, decided I wanted to go to Choate because I wanted to be closer to Mom and Dad. And they always instilled that academic excellence in me. And being somebody that came up to Brown and saw so many intelligent people, just that collegial, really willing to really push the envelope. When we talk about activism and having that activism translate into change, we learned it from them, and I think a lot of us here have. So that was one of those things where my parents set that expectation that, son, it's not where you're going to go to college, or if you're going to go to college, it's where. And so at Choate I excelled, and after that, now I think some might find this interesting. I started at the University of Pennsylvania, and the reason I did it was because playing competitive basketball, I get to play Villanova, Temple, Kentucky, St. Joe's, some of the best schools in the country in terms of college basketball. And they weren't, they were very accepting about it, but they weren't, the most pleased, as you can imagine. But I'll say they were extremely dedicated in coming to almost every game, just extremely supportive and loving. And, I would always call my mom almost every other day and talk to her about my experience at Penn. And really what I found at Penn is I found it was a kind of, I'll say this straight up, kind of a chop shop. And here's why. When I got to Penn, you had to fulfill the core curriculum. And you had the core curriculum, and then when you got to, you had to decide on three top majors that you wanted to apply for. Now, I'd always been somebody that was, from Choate, was taught that the professor is supposed to be the one that he wrote the book, he's supposed to be the one teaching you. And we had TAs that were grading our papers, and it wasn't the professors. And that level of personal education that I'd learned from Choate was not consistent with my experience at Penn at all. And even though I got to go to the NCAA tournament, which was great, I couldn't believe the sort of level of silos that the university had, that Penn had. It was very heavily sorority and fraternity driven. Groups were siloed by race. It was just, my experience after my sophomore year there, and I know it's very, very rare to do this, but I decided to transition because the straw that broke the camel's back was I didn't even get my major my number one major that I wanted. So I had a university, my parents, funding it, and my education with my working very, very hard on and off the court that wouldn't even let me pursue what I wanted to pursue. And that to me was just absolutely backwards. And it was inconsistent with what I'd learned from the tremendous community here at Brown University all throughout my life. Because again, this was a family. people here, as you all know, we band together, we respect our differences, we have diversity of thought, but you're not siloed and you're able to pursue what you want to pursue. And you should be able to as a student at 19. And so I made that decision to transition. And it was the best decision I've ever made. It really, really was. So the differences here between Brown and Penn, I got here, I was welcomed by all communities. Yes, basketball was a key focus, right? Because we still had to compete, and we did. We went to the NIT, which I'll say was something that we were very proud of. But at the same time, the professors who wrote the book were the ones that graded my paper, and I got an opportunity to challenge them, and they challenged me back, and so I'll say. That was something that was so unique here. I remember taking a course on Chicago from 1900 to the present day at that point, and the professor had written the book, and it was about we talked about the demographics in Chicago and how Chicago turned out the way it is in terms of being how African Americans and essentially other minorities and whites, why it's the demographic of Chicago, and it was I remember asking, well, why are the Cubs? Why do the Cubs tend to have a whiter sort of fan base, and the White Sox tend to have a more diverse fan base, and he really explained to me over time how those things, how the demographics shifted and why that is, and it's that level of just interaction that you really got to understand in challenging your professors here, and that's one example of one course, but. I got to be a TA in Professor Hazeltine's class, which was a big accomplishment. I ended up starting a Pilates business here when I was in college called Equilibrium, and that was because really here I was able to pursue the passions that I wanted, and it's because of greats, really icons like my mother. Who and my father, but really, this is,
We can see where this is going.
and maybe I'm a mama's boy, but I don't. I think a lot of us here would say we're this wouldn't be possible where we are today as a university without this woman, and
I'm cognizant of time, but I do want to offer at least the opportunity for one or two questions from the audience, given that we've got the family here. So if there's one or two questions or a question out there. He's observing. I've got one way in the back if you want to stand and name and.
Sure. My name is Steve, previous master graduate from Sunday out of the executive program. My undergraduate was HBCU out of Morehouse. So this is, again, a long circle arc for me. But it's interesting to hear this, and one of the things that I want to try to start to hopefully bridge or have a conversation about is from the executive program, what hasn't happened is this connection as a person of color to the institution. I just happened to run into
Yes.
I happened to run into her a couple of nights ago, so she mentioned a few things on campus. I didn't realize when I walked through the Van River gates that right by there was the monument. Yes. that was there specifically to identify, our history as a people and building the ground, right? And so there's still some disconnects. And so I'm just laying a little bit of information out there. What I'd like to know is, what can I do now to interact, engage, become a part of this great, fantastic history that I've been hearing about, especially led by these two generations and moving forward? How do I infuse into the ground? How do we all sort of wrap each other in support? This sounds like a very supportive institution. I'm so happy now to be a part of it. So just want to
Well, whether
get your thoughts.
Sure. Whether graduate or undergraduate or executive program, you're a part of the Black Diaspora at Brown, Page Council. So I would say, Andrea is the head of Inman Page, so you couldn't run into a better person. Just getting your name to her, or if you go to the website for Inman Page and get your information in, you'll be connected. And
I just wanted to also add, I serve with Andrea on the Presidential Leadership Council. So if you want to share your information with me, I am happy to pass that on and push.
Well, thank you all. I wish that we had more time, and I want to thank the Bailey family for your insights. And sometimes it was emotional, but it was so important. But it reminds me of why we continue to do this work. So thank you for all that you do.
sure.
I hope that many of you will come back October 27th, 29th for the Black Alumni Reunion. That's really important. And I do want to remind you all that the Inman Page Council is having a meeting right now at 4:45. It's going to start in a few minutes at the Bonanno Hall at 95 Cushing Street. So thank you all, and thank you to the
Thank you all.
Thank you.